What's going on, guys? Welcome to Rotor Riot and welcome back to Learn to FPV. Today we're going to talk about motor. So I'll run down the different specs of the motor and give you a few considerations to think about to help pick the right motor for you. So as far as specs, there's not a whole lot with motors. It's just KV, stator size, and then the overall dimensions or weight. I know a lot of you guys that have been in the hobby for a minute, you've already heard this 100 times, and I'm sorry, but there's new people that get into the hobby every day and they're not going to know what these numbers mean. I used to get this question a ton at the hobby shop I used to work at. So for stator size, this motor is a 2207. This is a 1106, 1408. You're always going to see those numbers on pretty much every motor. That's the dimensions of the actual stator. So it's not the dimensions of the entire motor, it's the dimensions of the stator. So the stator is the part that actually has the wires coiled up over it. The bell is the part that's going to have the magnets inside of it. And essentially what's happening here, you know how if you take two magnets with the same polarization, they push away, right? Well, each one of these, I think they're called poles, they're going to alternate so that it's always repelling it away and then one's pulling it towards, and they just keep alternating so it's constantly spinning around. So when you see 2207, what that's going to mean is that this is going to be 22 millimeters wide, 7 millimeters tall. It's very simple. Now for KV. KV is essentially the speed at which the motor is going to spin. So if it's a 2450 KV, the way that works is if you were to feed the motor 1 volt, it's going to spin 2450 RPM. And then you just times that by the voltage. So if you were to put a 3-cell battery on it, it's going to spin at a set speed. If you were to put a 6-cell battery, it's going to spin twice as fast. It's a pretty simple concept what KV is. There's some more technical specs that we'll get into later, but in general, and especially for a beginner, that's all you really need to think about when choosing the specs of the motor that you need. So when you're trying to pick the motor for you, here's some things that you should be thinking about. Firstly, there's price. In any different size of motor, you're usually going to find that there can be a range of prices. So sometimes one motor may be more than double the price of another motor. But there usually is valid reason for that, and not necessarily for everybody. Sometimes some people may go with the cheaper motor and it works just fine for their use. Other people, that cheaper motor is just not going to work as well. So some of the reasons why one motor is going to be so much more than the other is A, the materials used. So a lot of times if a motor is really cheap, it's made out of softer metals, it's going to bend easier, it's not going to be as durable. Another thing is the bearings they choose to use. Not all bearings are created equally. So sometimes you may get one little ding of a motor and then it runs really rough after that. Different companies are going to have different levels of quality control. So sometimes your cheaper motor, they may just kind of let things slide that were a more expensive motor. If it doesn't pass certain tests, they get discarded and they don't go out to the consumer. But there's definitely exceptions either way. Not every motor that's more expensive is really worth the extra money, and not every motor that's less expensive is not going to be good. So it's really just going to take some time and experience in the hobby and understanding what people are using and how well it's working, and trying things out for yourself to figure out what's going to work. Because like I said, if you go for a cheaper motor, it may not be made as durable, so you may be breaking them a lot, replacing them a lot. So over time, you're actually spending more. But maybe you're the kind of pilot that's just out cruising. You're not trying to really bash your quad. You're not crashing into concrete all the time. So those cheap motors that don't really take a crash well aren't being crashed very much. So they'll last you a long time. It really just comes down to your usage and what you need out of that motor. Another thing that can be factored in there is how much power that motor makes. So just because this motor is 2207 and another motor is a 2207 and they're both 2450 kV, due to some of the other factors that go into how a motor is made, they might not necessarily be the exact same amount of power. So if you're looking to go really fast, the cheaper motor in some cases may not make as much power, may not be as good for you. Another thing to think about is the brand of the motor. So just like anything else that you buy in the world, different companies have sort of different levels of trust of knowing that what they make is going to be quality, it's going to be fairly priced, it's going to last a long time, and they're going to stand behind their product and have good support. So you may find a motor that's really cheap. On paper, it seems like it has all the same specs, but it's some company that really no one's ever heard of, and if it's, you know, not a good motor, you're not going to be able to get any kind of support out of it. It's just something to think about. Another one is your choice of propeller that you want to use. You're typically going to pick the motor first and then pair a propeller with it, because props are a lot cheaper than motors, so it makes more sense to choose a motor and then find a prop that works well with it. But also, generally, like, the size of the drone and the prop kind of related. Like, we actually call the size of the drone based on the size of prop it can use most of the time. So you're going to hear, like, this is my 5-inch quad, this is my 6-inch quad, it's my little 2-inch. So knowing the size of propeller that you're going to use is going to affect what size motor you need for it as well. So to give you a little bit of idea on that, generally if you're going to use a 2-inch propeller, you're looking at anywhere from like an 1103 to 1106 motor. There's probably more than that. You could probably go a little smaller or a little bigger, but that's the general range, and that's going to apply for the rest as I go on. So for a 3-inch prop, you're in the 1306 to 1606 range. 4-inch prop, I would say like 1806 to 2204. 5-inch propellers, I would say probably about 2205 to like 2308. There's quite a bit of range in 5-inch. That's the most common prop, and you're going to find the most variations, the most different types of other equipment, so there's a range there. 6-inch, generally maybe a little bigger. You could probably go as low as like 2206 up to maybe 2408. So just to give you a general idea. So the size of the propeller and general size of the drone, that's going to dictate which size and which KV you choose. So generally, the bigger you go, the bigger the motor and the lower the KV. And vice versa, the smaller you go, higher KV, lower weight. You don't want to try to put a huge motor on a small propeller. It may seem kind of intuitively like that's going to give it more power, but that's not necessarily how it works. There's diminishing returns. You may not even actually find the KV that you would need in a huge size and a small prop, and it's just going to add unnecessary weight. So you want to stay generally in the range, and if you want more power, more speed, you kind of skew towards the high end of a bigger motor with a higher KV. And if you want more efficiency and longer flight time, maybe a little bit smaller motor, spinning a little bit slower. Motor choice can be a little tricky, and you can find sort of conflicting information, and you can just find conflicting results. There's a lot of variables that are going on. You have the weight of the drone, you have which type of prop you're using, you have which kind of battery you're using.